What's up, War Report family? We are back again live from day 3 of SEC Media Days. Joining me is the most special guest, the boss of all of this, the Southeastern Conference, Greg Sankey. Commissioner, let's jump right in. In your day 1 address, you answered a few questions about expansion, and you were adamant you're focused on your 16. Well, you've got Texas and Oklahoma in the conference right now. You know, what kind of talks have you had with the leadership of those universities about what expectations are for them in the conference and what you hope to achieve as a whole?
We've had 3 years to prepare, and that has included bringing the presidents and chancellors into our meetings over the last year to 14 months. Athletics directors have been with us for almost 3 years now in athletic director meetings. So they've heard reinforced over and over who we are, what the expectations are. I think we kind of live our own expectations, the expectation of competitive excellence, the expectation of collaboration, coming into a culture where we're going to have vigorous debates, but we seek agreement so that we can move forward with an outcome that places the conference in a leadership role. I think there's great excitement on both campuses. I know there's excitement across all 16 of our members. And to be here in Dallas now is an indication of what our future will include and what our future will be. And that's why our focus is on what I think is a great group of 16 universities.
Commissioner, you mentioned having this event here in Dallas, kind of to welcome them to the conference and to the culture that is the SEC. Every year we talk about how it just means more. Well, this year with them joining the conference, we're going to see some pretty historic games that would have only been bowl games in the past. Oklahoma comes to Auburn for the first time in the history of college football. We're going to see Georgia, Texas in a regular season. You know, can you talk about the historic matchups that fans are going to see and how you're going to produce more of that in the future?
One of our really key scheduling decisions, which we've shared, but I think has been forgotten, is the decision that every one of our 14 members was going to play either Texas or Oklahoma in the first year. And I can't overstate the importance of that decision because that then affects other decisions that were made along the scheduling continuum. That provides the matchup that you talk about in Auburn with Oklahoma, the chance for Georgia to play at Texas. You know, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Florida all go to Texas. Alabama finishes up the week before the Iron Bowl in Oklahoma. All of those games are exciting. And it's a chance for people to go see some different places, particularly for Texas and Oklahoma that may not have experienced a football game at Auburn, but also for fans that have been part of an SEC university that founded the league to go see a couple of different places. And then when you get to rivalries in football, I think some of those are obvious. The restoration of the Texas A&M and Texas football game, but Arkansas and Texas playing is historic on its own right. Oklahoma and Missouri were part of the Big Eight for decades and decades, and they renew a rivalry. I think that's football, right? And then when you get into basketball and get into baseball and softball and gymnastics, particularly, you know, an Oklahoma-Auburn gymnastics meet has its own level of excitement. And I think what we've done is build across all of our sports this level of interest and level of competitiveness that will provide a lot of fun for the participants and for the fans who are in attendance.
Lost in the conversation that you just mentioned are the Olympic sports, right? Like when we talk about conference expansion, it's focused around football a lot, but the truth is that you try to expand smart in consideration for those sports, right? Travel is a bigger deal for some of the non-revenue sports. Do you talk about, you know, how you guys are trying to serve the student athletes on that end?
Our expansion in 2012 with Missouri and Texas A&M added meaningful distance to some of our longer trips. We've been living well with that for well over a decade. Our longest trip last year was South Carolina to College Station. We've added about 100 miles to our longest trip, which is 5 or 10 minutes on an airplane.
Oh, wow, okay.
And part of our decision making was really to not extend ourselves so far that it disrupted the academic experience or the preparation or recovery experience. Our student athletes aren't going to spend an incredible amount of time in airplanes. They're going to spend time in classrooms, in preparation for their academics and preparation for their games and recovery from their games. I think that's advantageous, and that's across all of our sports. When you get to sports like swimming and diving and track and field, we know that 1/3 of the Olympic team in those two sports, actually over 1/3, come from SEC campuses. Those meets, those championship meets that are our end of the year events in swimming and diving and track and field, indoor, outdoor, are going to be international caliber meets now. We thought that was something special that we would bring. And so that just underscores the excitement about our future across the board in our 21 championship sports.
I think it's great what the conference is doing for those sports. Auburn in particular, has grown a very rich gymnastics culture. Baseball has come on as of late, and it's good to see the conference getting behind those sports. I want to shift a little bit into talking about Auburn. A couple of years ago, you had some conversations about Auburn hiring Hugh Freeze. In year one, he's worked to improve recruiting there. But I think that he's worked to earn the trust that maybe he had to get back from fans and maybe even from his peers. Have you had any conversations with Hugh Freeze since he's arrived at Auburn about how things are going and what his process is?
Oh, sure, yeah. And conversations at the time of hiring happen with all of our campuses. That's a mandate. And Hugh and I had conversations over 3, 4, 5 years about his consideration of returning. And I give him credit for having patience. I think he returned at the right time for him and an opportunity that was really important to he and his family and to Auburn University. So good for him. He walks into a situation, you're swimming upstream as rapidly as you can. He's been through that before. And typically you see a great deal of improvement year one to year two. And he came back at really an interesting time as there can be a lot more transfer movement. You've got name, image, and likeness opportunities. And as I evaluate his representation and his work, I give him a positive point of feedback because I think he's proven that he's ready and that he's passionate about what he does and where he does it, and great for him.
With college football playoff expansion, it's provided the opportunity for the SEC to get even more teams into this playoff. I think that as of now, it may be a given that the SEC winner and the SEC runner-up are going to be in a playoff. This past season, you had no doubt that the SEC champion was going to make the playoff. As a matter of fact, you said it pretty boldly. You said, I'm not worried about this, guys. The SEC champion is going to be in. What about the third and fourth teams from the SEC in the 12-team playoff? How do you feel about maybe getting 3 or 4 into this thing?
Well, last year, I'll be honest, I had a restless sleep after our championship game. And I didn't have any knowledge that we'd have a team in. I believe we deserved that. And
you said it. I said
confidently that if someone is evaluating football, at least one of our teams, and arguably two, and I still feel of any team that should have been in last year, it's the University of Georgia.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't conduct ourselves the way some others did, but I think strongly University of Georgia is one of the 4 best teams. But that's last year. We come to this year. We're going to have a conference champion in the 4 best. I would expect our second place team to be clearly in, host a first round game. And then the question is how many more? You look at last year, Ole Miss and Missouri certainly would have been in that mix.
Both of them would have been in, yeah.
Oklahoma, based on where they were, Texas was in. So that's a pretty lofty number. Will that play out this year when we're playing each other? I think that relates to how the committee evaluates the rigor of the strongest football conference in the nation. And I'll just take Georgia's schedule off the top of my head, where they play at Texas, at Ole Miss, at Alabama. They begin with Clemson. They have a historic rival in Auburn that they play. They end with Georgia Tech and a lot in between. That schedule has to be compared to others nationally. If they were 10-2 or 9-3, and I don't think that's what Kirby's goal is, compared to another team from another conference, 11-1 and 10-2, we can't just be pulled into, well, they have a better record, so they're in. You have to look at the rigor of what's happened and the strength of a football team. And so it'll be interesting to see how the CFP selection committee functions in picking the 5 best conference champions and then the 7 best remaining teams. That's
right.
Really that key, that evaluation of the 7 best remaining teams.
At the top of the week, you announced a new corporate sponsor in Sonic, right? The SEC, under your leadership, has continuously found new revenue opportunities to help grow the league and to keep things moving the right direction. What's the strategy for continuing that progress there? And you've turned this into the richest football conference in college football. Like, how do you keep that going?
There are several levels or several buckets of revenue opportunities. So we also announced Southwest Airlines as the official airline of the Southeastern Conference. That came out last week. We'll keep working on drawing the kind of support in through our conference-wide sponsorship program. That's one. When we went through negotiations to extend the CFP, the opportunity to increase our revenue there was really important, both the increase in revenue that comes to the CFP, but our percentage of that revenue, that's important for us in the future. We have opportunities through the NCAA basketball tournaments, men certainly, that provides for a success component. The women's basketball side is under a final evaluation where we can be rewarded financially for that success. What happens at the conference level with championships and other innovative revenue opportunities we still talk about, we have to respect what is another bucket, and that's campus revenue, those sponsorships, those partnerships, and those ticket sales. That's why you've seen, while it's not directly monetized, the ability to put out all of our football kickoff times. We think it's really important for our fan base to be able to plan. So you know what? We're going to have early kickoffs, noon Eastern kickoffs, really between noon and 1. But right now, if in mid-November your team will kick off between 11 a.m. and noon Central Time, you can make those plans now. Go to Auburn on a Friday night, stay for Saturday, and make a weekend of it, rather than trying to scramble on 6 days' notice. And that's an indication of how we can unlock revenue opportunities. We've allowed alcohol sales on our campuses. Not everyone's done it. They've all moved to that. They've done it carefully. We've allowed some signage opportunities now. All of that's an indication of trying to be sophisticated, but intentional and careful about how we can unlock some new revenue sources, whether they be the conference level or at the campus level, or access things nationally.
With 16 teams in closing, any chance that the conference decides to go to 9 conference games other than 8? It seems like a lot of the coaches and presidents were in favor of staying at 8, but does a change in college football landscape maybe necessitate some change in the amount of conference games you play?
Remember, when we announced expansion, it was for next season.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved up the entry date, we had full non-conference schedules, and disrupting everyone's schedule to just move from 8 was considered and ultimately decided we're going to start with 8. Then we made another decision to just mirror the schedule so you have kind of that balance from one year to the other of seeing teams home and away. We have a 26 schedule decision in front of us. We get to see what it's like to be in a single division with 16 teams, and then see what happens with the 12-team playoff that we discussed. Those are 2 really important data points that then, after the new year, first quarter, will allow us to have a debate and discussion about the number of games, the format of those games. We'll continue to do the work to prepare for that conversation, but I think it's wise to use that time before we jump down into the 26 decision-making mode.
What I just heard was, if we get 4 teams in, we're going to stay at 8.
We'll see.
What if our 14 gets left out? Maybe you will consider moving to 9. Listen, Commissioner, I think you're doing a great job helping grow the game of college football as well as the Olympic sports. We appreciate the work that you're doing there as well, too. I want to thank you for joining me again for SEC Media Days in 2024.
Thanks for being here.
Guys, that's it for another great segment live from SEC Media Days here in Dallas with Commissioner Greg Sankey, Commissioner of the SEC Conference. If you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. We are the War Report on every social media platform. TW Report, TikTok. We're signing off, and as always, War Eagle.